But we talked about it after, and he said, Mark, I didn't want you going over there and having one bad first week and then retreating home with your tail between your legs. You needed to commit. And that was what I need. You needed to hear that. Like, it was hard for him to say, but he's like, I needed you to go all in.
That's fascinating. There's power in being young, overconfident, and having an abundance of energy, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Right? You just threw yourself into the fire. In this episode, you'll get to know Marck de Lautour, the Kiwi real estate king. And you'll hear the story of how this New Zealander's pursuit of excellence in tennis led him to become a real estate mogul in Kansas City. I'm Dave Crenshaw, and this is My Success Project. Welcome back, friends, to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project. This is a show where I'm looking for ways to teach my children how to be successful through the life stories of others, and you get to come along for the ride no matter what your age is. In case it's your first time here, I'm a best-selling author. I speak around the world to Fortune 500 companies, and I've taught millions of people how to be successful through my online courses. With this show, I wanted to create something a little different. I wanted to create a legacy that I could leave to my children to help them succeed throughout their life. And I thought you'd also enjoy learning along with them. So in these interviews, I speak to some of the most successful people I've met in my life and career journey. And today's guest is one of those. A group brought me in to speak to them, and he was helping organize the event, and I got to know Mark quite well. Before I go into the interview, I want to ask you to do something in particular. I want you to look for something that you can do. So you're going to hear this amazing story from Mark of his journey from where he started to where he is today. As you're listening, I want you to look for an action that you can take. Just one, something that you will do to make his story a part of your life forever. And you definitely want Mark to be a part of your life. Marck de Lautour is the founder and CEO of SBD Housing Solutions, a real estate investment firm based in the Kansas City area. He has been investing in real estate since 2002 and has successfully flipped over 2,000 homes in the United States of America. His property management firm now manages over 700 units. Mark is also the host of the Mistake-Free Real Estate podcast and author of Mistake-Free Real Estate. Mark, thank you so much for taking some time to join us.
Dave, it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
And you're based in Kansas City. Is that where you are right now?
Yeah, at the SBD Housing headquarters. We have a neat little podcast studio here.
Yeah, it's beautiful. For those who can't see it, they're listening audio. It's a beautiful studio. And you and I got to know each other because a group that you assist with, Collective Genius, hired me to come in and speak. And as I got to know you through the process, I thought, man, here is a guy with a high degree of integrity, genuinely a good person that I really want to have in my life.
That means a lot. You know, I was told at an early age that the de Lautour name is one that has stand in good stead all the way back to our French ancestry through England and Napa Valley. And obviously, I'm a fourth generation New Zealander. Yeah, very proud of our lineage, but you only get one chance at a good name. So we were raised right.
Oh, that's fantastic. So was that something that was talked about regularly? This is your heritage, this is the name? Was that a part of your upbringing?
You know, the interesting thing about is my dad got into genealogy, I think when I was around the age of 7 or 8. So I was actually not christened M-A-R-C-K. I was christened M-A-R-K. So my original birth certificate is the normal spelling of Mark. My dad got into genealogy and found that there was actually a Countess de la Marck that married a de Lautour. And then they named their son Marck de Lautour, and it was M-A-R-C-K. This is way back, I think, in the 16th century. So my dad said, hey, you know, he was really getting into that line and went, he was an airline pilot. So when he would have some time off in London, he'd jump over to France and start digging into our family tree and asked me, would you like to change the name? So as a young 8-year-old, I said, sure, sounded great. And ever since, no one can spell my first name or my last name, Dave.
That's fantastic, though. That is really cool that's a part of, I mean, you had the opportunity to make that choice to connect you with your heritage. Genealogy is a big part of the culture that I live in and grew up with. And I love it. Like, I know that my great grandfather and my great grandmother immigrated from Austria to Chicago and was a grocer. He owned a grocery store. And so that entrepreneurship is part of my heritage as well. I love that callback to the people who paved the way for us to get here.
That's right. My father wrote a book about the 13 siblings, the 13 children of C.A. de Lautour. And so we were interested. So obviously that was when he got into it. And so it's been something that he's passionate about. But yeah, I mean, your family name's important. But I think just in general, I mean, I'm blessed. I was interviewed on a podcast one time, and they said, one of his questions is, what's your superpower? And I believe that my superpower is just being born into a family of loving parents that have been married for, 51, 52 years now. And, I have siblings that we're on a group chat all the time. We're super tight no matter where we are in the world, whether it be New York, Kansas City, or Australia, New Zealand, or wherever. Our siblings are very tight. And I believe the cousin, we were raised with very tight cousins. We vacationed together with our cousins. So family unit's always been very important, and we're trying to ingrain that in our family as well.
That really is a great superpower to have that kind of heritage and support from your family from the start.
I mean, we're against all odds, aren't we now, Dave? I mean, the divorce rate on first marriages is super high, and second marriages, I think it's even higher. I mean, it's against all odds to have parents that are married, 50 plus years. And so if you want a blueprint for a successful marriage, I certainly got it, and, super blessed.
So that kind of leads to the first place that I wanted to start with you was, you mentioned in the video, I saw a video that kind of talks about your background and how SBD started getting rolling. And you mentioned that education was important to your family. And so you started in a boarding school. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that was like for you?
Best times of my life, which sounds weird, right? So at the age of 12, I was, quote unquote, shipped off to boarding school. But no, my parents sacrificed a lot to put us through the best level of education that we could get. And King's College is the number one school in New Zealand. It's kind of the, perennial high school. And they put a big emphasis on full-time boarding, meaning you would only go home every other weekend. So you'd get dropped off on Sunday, and then you would have 2 weeks, and then you would be allowed to go home for the Saturday, Sunday fortnightly. And so that meant that you were living in a dorm room with, your other students at the school, and tight-knit relationships, almost like a brotherhood of sorts. It was just a very special school that taught us a lot about leadership. They really encouraged all-roundedness in their students. So whether it be the house music program where all the students would participate, they'd always, divinity was obviously on the cards. We went to chapel in a suit and tie a couple of times a week, but everyone had to do sports. It wasn't an option. You obviously could pick and what you wanted to go into. You had to do artwork. You had to do different classes. So they just wanted an all-round experience. And it was, just a great time.
I find it fascinating. I have interviewed people with lots of different backgrounds. And I think a lot of people's reaction when they hear this is similar to mine, which is it sounds like something out of the Regency novel or Harry Potter, right? You're going to this special boarding school where you're creating that camaraderie. That sounds like a really special experience that you had.
Magic, right? I wouldn't trade for the world. It is hard being a parent now on the flip side. Couldn't imagine being away from my children, but I think that's a selfish reflection, perhaps, thinking that I wouldn't do the same thing. Obviously, it's not the done thing here in the Midwest. I think on the East Coast, you have a little bit more of that. I think the most you get in the Midwest is maybe like a summer camp. They might go away for a week or two, but it's the same kind of thing. I think it really allowed me, and I think my parents focused on, really building, the old adage that you give your children wings and then encourage them to fly the nest. We were taught from a very young age that New Zealand, and just learned that, New Zealand is a tiny, tiny, tiny part of the world. I think in the Midwest and in America, you can get maybe a false pretense that because America is the biggest and greatest nation in the world, that there's not much else. And of course, we know that not to be true. But if you want to go to the beaches, you go to California or Florida. If you want to go to the mountains, well, Utah and Colorado. You don't think I want to go skiing in the French Alps or the Swiss Alps. You don't think I want to go to the beaches in Tahiti and Fiji. But that's what we did as kids. Like that was the upbringing we had was, the world is out there. Go experience it. it's kind of little brother syndrome in New Zealand, right? Australia is kind of the first jump. You jump over there and see what they have going on. But then, yeah, America was this world of opportunity. It was so exciting. I mean, I accepted an athletic scholarship without even coming to the city. I'm like, yeah, let's go. And so, at the age of 12, I was in boarding school. But at the age of 18, I flew halfway around the world and had never even been to the city before and said, let's go try this out.
So one question I want to pause on before we get to that next stage of your life. I think a lot of people, there's a narrative right now, which is it's almost bad to have privilege, or if you do, you've got too much of an advantage or lots of advantage. Can you address that in terms of like the work aspect? Because clearly you did have that advantage, but you also had to work, didn't you? It wasn't like everything was handed to you in that kind of school setting. No matter what your career is, your foundation of success begins with one thing: effective time management. And thanks to the generosity of Microsoft, you can get my entire course, Time Management Fundamentals, for free on LinkedIn Learning. Go to davegift.com to get your free access now. This is the course that millions around the world have used to become more productive and reduce stress. Everyone from Fortune 500 executives to freelancers to students. Now, it's the same coaching I've provided in person for tens of thousands of dollars per day, but you can get it for free on LinkedIn Learning. You don't need to provide anything to access it. No credit card, no email. Just go to davegift.com and start learning. Thank you so much, Microsoft and LinkedIn Learning, for your partnership. davegift.com.
Not at all. And I want to be clear that although it was an expensive education, it wasn't, crazy. I mean, we're paying about the same to put our daughter through Catholic school here in Kansas City. It's just in New Zealand, public schools are decent. And so most people go down that road. There was kind of a stringent acceptance procedure that you had to go through. You wouldn't do it today, but back then, they do it. I don't think we'd see this in America, but I had to sit down in an interview with the head principal. At a young age, you're taught to speak for yourself. My parents did not speak really much in that interview. He was talking to me directly. I think we excelled as a family in that our parents put a major emphasis on the dinner table discussion. I just believe that we've gone so far away from dinner table where, kids' sports activities and everything gets in the way of that amazing camaraderie you have at the dinner table. And our parents put an emphasis on that. Now, my dad was an airline pilot, so he was often gone for 7 days at a time, and then he'd be back for 7 days, and then gone for 3 days and back for 3 days. But whenever possible, we would sit around a dinner table together, especially on the Friday and Saturday and Sunday nights, where we would sit around and encourage, it was how was your day and how was your day? And you would talk and go deep. And, everyone was encouraged that I think what was taught was that your viewpoint is valid and you can talk with adults. Yeah. So look, privilege, sure. That's why I say superpower. I'm blessed to be raised in a family that, that put a massive emphasis on education. There are many, underprivileged that could not go through that. But you get what you get out of it, what you put into it. And I think it was not just that my parents' desire to go there, but there was an expectation that you would give it your all. That's just, and I think partly, I was speaking to someone earlier today as my son has just kind of going down this road with his sports. I think sports are a microcosm of life because you can't fake it, right? You can't step up to the plate and pretend to be good at hitting a baseball. You've had to train and put in the reps in the gym and, in the facility to be able to hit the ball. And similarly, you can't fake it in front of a principal trying to get into a school. You have to have been able to be comfortable talking to an adult about, big ideas and big thoughts about what you want to do.
And that dinner table discussion or mindset, is that something that you're continuing with your kids?
Yeah, it's ever a challenge. Sunday nights are kind of sacred. We for sure do it on Sunday evenings. I wish we could say we do it more often, but our kids are teenagers and driving all around. So it's something that I value and we do whenever possible, but it's certainly not to the extent that we were doing it growing up, at least as I remember. And maybe, as I look back, maybe it wasn't as frequent, but it was memorable. And we had I'm number 2 of 4. So my siblings are, very close to me. But when I go back home, my goodness, I mean, we sit down at the dinner table and have dinner at a dinner table, and my kids know it's coming. When we go to my mom and dad's house, it's dinner at the dinner table. It's a special time.
Oh, I completely agree with it. It's something we're trying to do with my family as well. Okay, so you mentioned 18, you left. So had you formed an opinion about what you wanted to be when you grew up by that point?
I was driven. I think so. Have you read the Birth Order book by Dr. Kevin Leman? So great. So I'm the classic, hard charging middle child trying to keep up with my older brother.
Okay.
So nothing ever good enough always, and then when I finally, at the age of 12, I'll never forget, I beat him at tennis for the first time. And then I'm just like, okay, who's next? And you're just always trying to beat the next person and, hard charge. It's hard, those middle children always trying to prove themselves. And you have a lot of, entrepreneurs that are kind of born out of that. I had a thought to be an attorney, but didn't really know what that would look like. So no, I had an entrepreneurial burning, kind of undertone of wanting to be a business owner. There were part of, my parents were, well-to-do, but not super wealthy. Like I was around at the school that I went to, I was exposed to some uber wealthy people in New Zealand. Like my friends that I, grew up with, that I was in high school with, were kind of like their parents were the top 10 richest in New Zealand. So, I mean, there was certainly like privilege, but they were just regular guys. I mean, super nice. But I got to see when I would go to their houses and the cars that they drove. I mean, I kind of, there was maybe an ambition that was kind of burning deep inside that I kind of like, man, well, that's cool. I mean, his house is awesome. And they get to fly on a helicopter to go to the golf course. I've never seen that before.
My goodness.
That's kind of neat. And so I read a lot, when I was in college, again, just chasing the dream of, business. And so I went to the University of Missouri here in Kansas City. So UMKC, okay. The block is headquartered here. And so he's been the massive donor to the business school. So very strong business program. I got my undergrad and kind of an accelerated MBA program because, for that matter, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I'd always just said I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but what does that mean, Dave? Until you get out in the world and kind of can drive value to somebody, you don't really know what that is. And so, no, I was still kind of searching back then.
So I know from looking at your bio, Mark, part of that time when you were growing up was tennis, and it sounds like you were pretty darn good at it, right? Good enough to get a scholarship?
Yeah, good enough to play Division I, for sure. That really was a good fit for me when I looked at the opportunities and the offerings that I was getting over here. I really had 2 primary goals. One was to go to a big city because Auckland, although New Zealand is a population of only 5 million people, about 2 million are in Auckland, and that's where I grew up. So, I mean, I was a big city kid. So okay. My parents didn't want me in some, in a tiny town, just, culture shock from coming from a big city into America in the middle of nowhere. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing, I was just committed. I didn't really know what it meant, but I just wanted to play Division I just to see how I would compare. So
what's a principle of success that you learned from tennis that you apply to your daily life now?
I would say that the success principle from tennis is just you've got to put in the reps. And the thing that people don't see is the hard work that you put in the background. We always had a tennis court in our backyard. The first one was a grass tennis court. We grew up in Christchurch in New Zealand, population of probably only around, 5 or 600,000, I think, in the city. But we were out in the outskirts of town. My father grew up on a farm and definitely has the farming blood in him. And so we grew up on a deer farm, and in the backyard was, New Zealand is one of their claims to fame. It's one of the best climates in the world to grow grass. So we had a grass tennis court in the backyard that we learned to kind of roll the white lines on and put the net up and down. And my brother and I would just be playing for hours. When we moved up to Auckland, we built a tennis court in the backyard. And my father, again, ever the handyman and kind of DIY guy being up on a farm, he would have sayings like, never cut that which can be untied, right? Because you may need the piece of string later on down the road. And so we actually built a retaining wall. It's quite a steep slope in our backyard out the back of our house. And he built a retaining wall out of used tires. So he went and just got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of of old car tires, and we would stack them. And then Andrew and I, our responsibility was to come and pack them with mud all through the inside of the inside of the tire. So we did these rows and rows and rows of tires to build up the height, where then you could come in and level out the ground and put the tennis court in the backyard. But having said that, with that tennis court in our backyard, I would be on the ball machine for hours and hours and hours. And
yes,
it just, the training, the reps. Even if it's someone that's a comedian, like like Jim Carrey, you think he's so naturally gifted. No, Jim Carrey trained in front of a mirror for hours to get the facial expressions just right for each individual thing that he did.
Jerry Seinfeld agonizes over a single word in his delivery. And that's
training
what allows it
and
to seem
reps,
effortless.
right? And I think that's why we love our kids being in kids sports, because you get the dedication to a team. You've got to think, team over self. When we hire someone here at the office, we talk about being humble, hungry, and smart. And I think those things are kind of brought out in sport, right? You've got to have the hunger and the drive to do it yourself, because no one's going to do it for you. You've got to be humble enough to realize that you're not the best, and there's always someone out there that's better than you. Even Novak Djokovic, he's constantly in fear of someone coming along and being better than him, and that's what pushes him in the gym. And I was just always fearful that I was going to lose, and I just hated to lose way more than I enjoy winning. But I just cannot stand losing, and it's that fear of losing, or the hatred of losing. And I tell my kids never to use the H word. I'm not a fan of hatred, but I hate to lose, Dave.
So someone's going to listen to this objectively, and they're going to say, that sounds really negative. You're motivated by fear and you're motivated by anger. I mean, is that still what motivates you? Or do you consider that, hey, that's okay if it's channeled towards something good?
Yeah, I think the hatred is towards something that I don't like. Losing is no fun. You can learn. I learn a lot. Like, I always lose, right? In the end, you always lose. But I think I've learned that I learn more from my failures than I do from my successes. If I go on the tennis court and beat some guy 6-0, 6-0, what do I learn there? That the guy wasn't any good and didn't put up a fight. But if I go lose 7-6, 7-6, why did I, or 6, if I get pounded love, like what do I learn from those mistakes, that I need to work on this and this and this and this? So you learn way more from your losses than you do from your successes. And the same can be translated to business. There's no doubt.
So where were the moments where real estate started to take form as a career in your mind? Was that during college, or did that occur? Let me back up. Let me ask a different question. So what was it that you were studying in college during that time of figuring things out?
So got my BBA, Bachelor in Business Administration. There was not an emphasis on real estate available there, so that was not a focus, but I started to read books and study. I enjoyed autobiographies and looking at uber successful people and what they had, what had led them down a certain path and how they had developed wealth. And I found that real estate was fairly common for all those that had hit a certain threshold. And so when Rich Dad, Poor Dad came out, or at least when I read it for the first time in the year 2000, I was a senior in college. And at that time, that book really spoke to me. My father had tried to introduce me to the stock market, just the classic, like you're in high school, hey, let's take $1,000 and, we'll pick some stocks. And it was a figurative $1,000, right? So we weren't really playing with real money, but you have $1,000, go pick some stocks and then see what it would do. And then if you had done it with an extra zero or 2 extra zeros, what would that number look like today? Super boring to me, like had no interest. Like you'd look in the paper the next day, like uber eager to see how much it had gone up, and it hadn't moved. And then New Zealand Stock Exchange is even more stable than the New York Stock Exchange. So very little movement, didn't understand how, or I felt like it would move on its own. There's nothing I'm doing to make it move. So what interest do I have? So had no interest in the stock market, found real estate, and then started comparing and contrasting, and heard people talking about the comparing and contrasting the two. So that was when I started to think about, going down the real estate journey. But I always thought it would just be what I put my retirement dollars into. I had yet to find my path in real estate specifically.
So did you start to pursue a different career prior to getting into real estate? Because it sounds like you were viewing it as not the primary source of income, but a vehicle to hold wealth, develop wealth.
Yeah, so I applied out of getting my MBA. I applied at Hallmark Cards to international business. I came back with an undergrad and an MBA in international business management. So I thought, well, hey, who are the international players in Kansas City? And Hallmark Cards is kind of was a perennial power and one of the largest employers. So I interviewed with them, didn't get the position. And then my father-in-law at the time had a small advertising business. He passed away about 6 years ago, but at the time, I was, playing some golf with him and spending a lot of time with my bride-to-be. We got married in 2001. And from 2000 and 2001, he had an idea of putting advertising inside commercial aircraft. So if you're sitting on a city bus, you look up and there's advertising all up and down. Well, he had patented a product that was like a watermark effect that was kind of a decal, a fancy decal of some kind that would, on those, tan-colored overhead stove doors inside a commercial aircraft, he thought, well, hey, if we put advertising up there, I think there'd be some ad space for a pretty captive audience on a 3-hour or 10-hour flight. And so he kind of put me in charge of that operation. So I actually got to, while I was getting my MBA, I was talking to the VP of marketing for United Airlines and Vanguard Airlines and Champion Airways and Frontier and all these different airlines around the country. And we were successful at getting it up with a beta test on Vanguard and Sun Country Airlines. And so that was kind of stepping into the whole entrepreneurial journey at the time, seeing what that looked like. And he had blind faith in me, a loving, future father-in-law, and allowed me to just kind of go do what I did and talk to people. And yeah, we're able to talk our way onto the airlines. Now, September 11th, 2001, obviously had a pretty major impact on that business. And so when September 11th hit, you can imagine, not only did they cut the advertising dollars, they didn't want to take any risks on any kind of new advertising. I mean, the airlines were trying to stay in business. And so, for about a year, it just got parked and they didn't end. I'd flipped a house during that time. And that's kind of when I pivoted.
So you mentioned in that story how you met your wife and you got, what year did you get married? 2001, 2000?
01.
Okay. That's the same year I got married, by the way, which is kind of interesting. What impact, other than, of course, meeting her father, what impact did she have in your career or the way that you started to formulate where things were going to go in your life?
Well, she kept me in America would probably be the biggest thing, right? I mean,
okay.
I'll back up a little bit and tell you about a story we had at a dinner table back in New Zealand back in 1995. Yeah, so maybe I'm retreating on the storyline here, but this, I think you'll appreciate this because it leads to where I'm at. But I was I knew there were other people that had pursued tennis in America. There'd been 2 or 3 other guys that had got scholarships in America. And although the New Zealand Tennis Federation was not really good about placing at that time, I had enough contacts that I was kind of like doing my own thing, trying to get placed. And I knew I wanted to go to America. So, put some VHS tapes, sending out my resume to try and get recruited, that kind of thing. So when I finally got the offer and it committed to the University of Missouri here in Kansas City, I was all excited and kind of, ego was like, oh yeah, I'm going to America. And, the schooling in New Zealand is February through December. And then we have like December, January, February off, and you come back into school again because that's our big summer holidays in the Southern Hemisphere. So I'd graduate in December. I accept the scholarship in like March or April, and I was going to start in the fall. So I had about 4 or 5 months where I just worked, back home. And then about 2 weeks out, I started like packing. And suddenly it hit me like, oh my gosh, I've never even been to Kansas City. I'm flying halfway around the world. And we're at a dinner table with some of my parents' friends. And I remember saying at the time, oh, well, I was like, yeah. And they're like, oh, you're going to America. It's so exciting. And I'm like, yeah. And I made a comment. This is now only about a week out or 2 weeks out from going. And I said, well, yeah, but if I don't like it, I'm just going to come home. And my father stopped the conversation and he said, Mark, no, you've made a commitment to the university. You've been given a scholarship. You'll be there for 4 years. And then you may choose to come home. And I talked about it after the fact. And he actually has less of a remembrance of the conversation, but left a major impact on me. But we talked about it after when he said, Mark, I didn't want you going over there and having one bad first week and then retreating home with your tail between your legs. You needed to commit. And that was what I need. You needed to hear that. Like, it was hard for him to say, but he's like, I needed you to go all in. because you're going half around the world. You're obviously, we can't be there, as a shoulder to cry on if things went bad, or just, come home for the weekend and then go back. That was not an option. I didn't want you going over there and then not committing and going all in. So that was a very memorable kind of momentous occasion of my life. So I say that then to say what was, now I'm all in, not only on America, but, this beautiful bride of mine, I wasn't going to leave her. And we talked about where we were going to live. And I said, look, let's just, see. Her family was all in Kansas City, and let me just give it a go. And yeah, I kind of niched into this amazing opportunity that I'm sure we'll delve into, but on real estate. Yeah. But it was really at that time, just, how my wife impacted. I think I would say I was like head over heels in love and got married and, had a great friendship. I got to marry my best friend. So certainly was not thinking about going back home to New Zealand. So, and she was just the one, she's very steady and doesn't like change. So for her, like she got a nursing degree. She went into the ICU, trauma nurse was her thing, and then held that same position for 14 years. So I was the opposite, where I'm like, I'm just going to see what happens. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this and just see what happens. So I think she was the rock, or the stability and the steady income that allowed me to kind of just go kind of throw the dice at life and see what happened.
This is a moment where I'm fascinated about the connections that we have. And this happens every time. There's always something where it's like, man, we share something common. That was the same thing with me. My wife allowed me to pursue my dream of being a rock star for a few years, and she provided the stability. And we both think, A, that was a terrible time of our lives. And B, thank goodness it happened, because now I don't look back and go, I wish I had, tried to be a musician. That's completely out of the system now. And I attribute a big part of the success I've had is that freedom that my wife gave to me in the early part of my career, if you could call it that.
Yeah, I don't look back. Some people may, because even the first quote unquote job I had, I think, out of compassion, I think, her dad was paying me, a meager salary just to kind of help, because we were started, but we were paying $400 a month in rent back then, Dave. What do you can't get into too much trouble, just living in a small 2-bedroom flat. And she was going and making a lot more money than I was. It was fun.
So where did the transition to real estate occur? Where did you first start getting involved with it?
So I actually answered an ad in a newspaper, Dave. It was a call to action, in the sports section. Shocker, right? Looking for those young, hungry athletes. And it was calling out, learned how to buy foreclosure properties. This was in 2001. Wow. And that caught my attention. Free seminar, no obligation. And so I went along to it and, of course, got upsold onto his coaching program in Springfield, Missouri, a guy by the name of Larry Holder. Don't even think he's in business anymore, but he changed my life. I went down there, spent $5,000, of which I did not have, put it on a credit card, went home and tried to explain to the wife that you have 3 days to cancel. But there's a history in our family of me just kind of doing things and her ending up being the supportive wife after a discussion. So I go down there and learned all about finding deals, finding how the foreclosure process worked, how a bank cleanses title, how it goes to the courthouse steps and actually, forecloses on an asset. What does missing a payment mean? How quickly do they kick you out of the home? What is a sheriff's sale? What's a tax auction? All of these different things. And then I came back and kind of same thing my dad taught me, like do it on paper first. I went to the auctions and I'm like, man, every day they're having these auctions and there's only like 1 or 2 guys there. And I would drive by a $150,000 house and I saw the guy just bought it for $30,000. And I'm like, that seems like a really good deal to me. Let me have a go at it.
That's fascinating because I know personally I hear about a seminar like that and I think this can't be any good, right? This is someone just trying to extract money from people, but that actually was a very positive thing for you to take that risk and to take that jump.
Yeah, I often get asked, Dave, from people, Mark, I have $5,000 or $10,000. Like, what should I invest in? What house should I buy? And I said, well, if that's what you've saved up, you need to be investing in yourself. You need to learn and invest in yourself first, or buy an education system, like understand what you're getting yourself into before you just try and pay someone else to do it with a small amount of money that might just get you into trouble.
Yeah, that's a great point. Getting that education first.
Critical.
Know what you're getting into. Okay, so from that, how did you transition to your first house? Because it's the first that's always the hardest for people.
It is. And so the first house was a duplex in Kansas City, a half duplex to be exact. And, no one else showed up at the auction. I'd done my research. I felt pretty good about it. The opening bid was $29,000. No one else showed up for it. So I got it for $29,001.
Whoa.
And so then I, went in and looked at the property. The people had left. It was vacant. It smelled like cat. It was disgusting. So for first one, I kind of got thrown in the deep end where it was, the subfloor was rotted out and the cabinets were ugly. And so then I knocked on the door on the other side that was the other half of the duplex, which I did not own. It was individual parceled. And I met a lovely old man that still lived there to this day, Jerry and Dottie. And Jerry was a nice old man with a beautiful home inside. So me being the smart sales guy that I am, Dave, I went and told my wife, hey, honey, we bought this house today. I'm so excited. But rather than taking her into this trashed out home first, I took her to introduce her to Jerry and Dottie on the other side. And I walk her in and she's like, oh, this is really nice. I could see ourselves living here. Great. Okay. Hey, Jerry, we'll be right back. And I take her into the other one and she's like, no, I will never live there. So that was one where I'm up on a ladder and, painting it and redoing it, so the first one was just $30K. I went in, did quick little remodel and moved into it myself, moved out of the place we were renting, did a cash out refi. It appraised at like $108,000. I was able to pull out 70% of that. So paid off my father-in-law who had loaned me the $30K to begin with. And then I had an extra 20 or 30 grand to go on to my next project.
That's fascinating. There's power in being young, overconfident, and having an abundance of energy, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Right? You just threw yourself into the fire.
Let's do it. I've seen guys paint before. I'm sure I can figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so then how did that start transitioning? So you took the money from that and you started to invest in more. Was it one more? Was it a couple more? Like, had the bug fully bitten you at that point?
Fully bit me. I mean, I saw this honey hole, Dave, where I'm like, I can buy houses at 20 or 30 cents on the dollar. It seems like the lowest risk I could possibly buy. Could I go to Google and buy stock at 20 cents on the dollar? No, you can't get stock for that. But these real assets, if I was, again, you can have termite damage and roof damage and foundations and bad AC and all of the stuff, right, that can go wrong with a house. But it can be fixed. And there's people that are wanting the business to come help me fix. So the one thing I learned from the first one was I don't want to be that guy. So that was the only house I ended up doing myself, hired everything out from there. But it proved concept that I can go buy a house for 20 or 30 cents on the dollar. And then I just went to town, started buying as much as I could and looking for private money resources to back me. And then after I'd done like 5 or 6 of them, got a finance guy that would back me all the way. And we tried to scale. And we then became the dominant player on the courthouse steps, outbidding everybody and buying hundreds.
So, boy, there are a couple of things I really want to ask you about there. One is your ability to let go and delegate. I think that's where a lot of young entrepreneurs make a mistake, is they think, I can do it best, therefore I need to be the one doing it. But it sounds like early on, you were able to let go of that. So talk to me about your mindset and how you were able to begin delegating early on in the process.
Yeah, I kind of looked at it as though what's the highest and best use of my time? And I thought if I would miss out on opportunities if I'm painting or doing carpet or tearing stuff out or all of the numerous different chores that had to get done. So I'd rather pay more to get that done by a professional. They'd do it better than me, let's be frank. But also I would be able to be off finding the next deal that would allow me to go and, make a little bit more money on the next house and then the next house. And so my strategy was twofold. The mentor of Robert Kiyosaki, who I've never met, but would love to one day, but he was a mentor in that I knew I wanted to buy and hold. Now, flipping became, I needed to make money first. So I flipped to make money, but I knew that I would eventually buy and hold assets long term. And so, it was funny. I went to the courthouse steps today, actually, because we're still actively buying, and we got outbid on an asset that back when I'm talking about this time period now, 20 years ago, I would have paid $30,000 for it. And today they bid it. And this is a distressed asset like kind. And it got bid up to 187 today. And I'm just
wow,
blown away that, you've just had so much appreciation, but real estate wins in the end. So no, I saw the ability of kind of a who, not how, if you will, where it's not how can Mark go do everything, it's who can I partner with to scale most effectively.
So you brought up a great principle, and this is something that we've discussed as I've been exploring working with you. You really like to emphasize buy and hold over flipping, right? What is the value of buying and holding a real estate asset?
My goodness, where do I begin? The obvious one is you pay tax when you sell. If you hold, you do not pay tax. So that's the biggest benefit in general is you get cash flow. There's the four pillars of real estate are cash flow from the asset, the appreciation upside, the depreciation or the tax benefits, as well as the ability to scale with leverage. If I walk into a bank, Dave, and say, hey, I'm thinking about expanding my portfolio of Apple stock. I'd like to leverage 80%. Can I borrow 80%? I'm going to go buy a bunch of Apple stock. They'll say, what are you talking about? We don't, lend on that. But if I go in and say, hey, I'm looking at expanding a portfolio and I'm going to buy this house, can I borrow 80% and I'll put down 20%? All day long, because they know that there's nothing as safe as real estate. It's so stable, especially when it's professionally managed and cash flow positive. So yeah, those are, in a nutshell, I could go on for days, but I just figure I don't want to, I want to minimize my tax burden as much as possible, and buying and holding is the best way to do that. Now you have to make an income. So if you are in real estate, so I was in real estate specifically, so I had to flip to make money, but then I took that money and just invested into real estate and held long term. I've never been one to put money in the market.
So, okay, this brings up another question, which is risk. And entrepreneurship is a balance of risk and reward. And you have to be able to tolerate more risk than the average person. So I think someone listening to this, they're thinking, man, I put all that money in real estate, but there's so much risk associated with it. So what would your response be to that? Or how do you personally handle that burden of risk?
So I'll answer that in two parts, because I think you're also asking me, like, how did I handle it back in the day? And I think your point of just being kind of young, dumb, and aggressive was part of that. You try and be sensible. You're smart and you're going to be as sensible as possible, but I didn't know all the pitfalls that you get into. At the end of the day, if you're buying something for 30 cents on the dollar, it's hard to get burned. So I had that always in the back of my mind, that I was just getting deal after deal after deal. So for me, it was all about the strike price. I was buying at such a deep discount that it made sense to me. Flip to this day, I believe that there's risk in doing nothing. I'm now looking at people that are my age that say, oh man, I wish I had have invested back in the day. One of the risks that they took was, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to put money in the stock market, and then I'm going to have to work till I'm 65 years old. That's a risk they took, and now it's playing out, right? I think there's risk in leaving your money in the bank, and now inflation's eating away with it. There's risk in doing something, and there's risk in doing nothing. I think you've just got to educate yourself as to those risks, and then be willing to, again, go all in with what you think is best. Educate yourself, find out what you think is best, and then just back yourself. I think too many people are just scared and fearful, and they don't back themselves. I think back to my upbringing.
Sorry, what does that mean, back themselves?
Yeah, so I think back to, like, trust their instinct, trust their gut. What I think is, they abdicate their responsibility of financial makeup to a financial advisor. And I play a golf with a lot of them. I know these guys personally, and they don't know any more than we do. No one knows what the stock market's going to do. They don't know if it's going to go up or if it's going to go down. And yet we're abdicating our responsibility to guys that are just paid to, on a percentage of what they manage. And I'm not saying all financial stockbrokers are an evil or anything like that. They're obviously doing a job and they have a service to perform. But I think we've got to the point where we completely abdicate our responsibility. We don't study finance, study wealth, study real estate, study, the intricacies of interest rate and what it's going to do. I mean, I love to learn from economists and forecasters and guys like Barry Habib and Bruce Norris and people that are saying this is what might happen in the future. Like, you've got to do your research and then back yourself to say, I've done all the research. Now I need to commit and be committed to the process and go do it. I think too many people are wishy-washy and don't ever put their money where their mouth is.
So let's return now a little bit to the story, which I think relates to what we're talking about. Talk to me about how your business was affected during the Great Recession. So we're talking, roughly 2007 to 2009. What was the impact? How did you respond to that?
That's a great question, and it's twofold. The one obvious one is, oh my gosh, now we've got, I've just been trained up from 2002 through 2008, becoming an expert at buying foreclosures. And now we've just magnified it where you've got 10 times as many foreclosures. So, hello, opportunity. It's knocking. It was the greatest. I was just so blessed to be there in that space in that time, because it will never happen again the way it did then. And just super blessed that I was in that arena when it was such a bloodbath. Now, having said that, it wasn't all roses. I said that I was backed by a guy that came and said, let's go do hundreds of homes. And we did. That business partnership failed. Probably a different discussion for a different day, but safe to say that those houses, that we had a lot of rental property and they kind of just got put on the side. But we dissolved that partnership, and they wanted to go do other things. There were three of us, and one of them lost his job. And so it was kind of an awkward time where his profession was in upheaval. And so we kind of all went our separate ways. But because I was they were silent business partners, I was the operator, they were the financiers. So now I still had the operation, I had the crews, I had the property management team, I had everything that I needed. Now I just needed capital. And so the way I pivoted through that downturn is kind of what you see now, Dave, as my turnkey operation. Was I was just doing it for myself. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much opportunity. I've got to tell the world. And so the only people that I found that would listen to me were my initially friends and family, and people that were referred by friends and family. And so I started with investors from as far afield as Australia and New Zealand and South Africa and the UK. And so I just created an atmosphere and a safe environment I formed an LLC. I would form a bank account for them. They would fund their bank account, and then I would start buying houses for them as much as we possibly could, because the banks were not really yet lending on real estate. So I needed private capital, and I found it in foreign waters.
And so basically what I'm hearing is a situation where it was tough for other people, you were able to turn that into an opportunity, partially because you were in a position with enough cash flow to make those kinds of investments, right?
Well, I wasn't. And so I pivoted to where, my thing was, oh my gosh, I would go and see a house that I knew was worth $100,000 and it would sell for $10,000. And I'm like, there's so much opportunity. I have to find a way. So I'd be knocking on doors, telling people, showing examples of what we could do. So it would be like, hey, you put up the money, I'll do all the work, and we'll split it 50-50. It would be, hey, if you want to build a rental portfolio, I can buy rentals for you. Just pay me a fee for an acquisition fee, a remodel fee, and then I'll manage it for you on the back end. Like I put myself in position to just take advantage of this, the greatest wealth transfer that I had ever seen. And again, everyone's like, oh yeah, that was so common sense. Of course you would do that. Well, no, it's a scary time. Banks were like, I'm not going to lend on real estate. And oh my God, real estate's in the tank. The irony is when Walmart has a sale 50% off, everyone goes running to buy junk. When real estate had a sale 50% off, everyone's like, oh my gosh, you should not buy real estate, Mark. I don't know what you're doing. That's really scary. You shouldn't do that.
Which the opposite is true. That's the best time.
Yeah. So you talk about risk. I mean, I was putting all my money in assets that had gone down in value. Would they continue to go down? Some people thought they would. I just figured, hey, everything I'd learned, everything I'd read is that real estate wins in the end. And I had yet to meet a 70-year-old, white-haired, wise real estate investor that owned 100 doors that says, man, I wish I didn't own all that real estate. Because if he bought it 50 years ago, it had doubled or tripled in value. So I've just yet to find someone that has a lot of real estate holdings that regretted it.
Well, there's something here in your story, and I think sometimes we all have the tendency to discount our ability at something. And there is something unique that I'm seeing here, which is you had that knowledge, you had that confidence because you spent so much time reading and learning, and also your prior experience with real estate, right? So that when this happened to you, it felt like common sense.
I think I was raised in a family that said, of course you can. Go do that. Of course you can. Why not you? Of course you can. You should do that. Not like, no, you didn't go to school. You didn't get training for that. You're a business guy. You're not a real estate guy, or whatever the case may be. I mean, my siblings are rock stars. My sister was a world-class triathlete. My younger brother is a very famous actor in New Zealand. My older brother's general manager of a large, rental car company. I mean, we were encouraged from a young age. Yes, you can. And I think, to be told that, you're almost blind to the risk, right? Or not blind to the risk. You're blind to thinking you can't do something, Dave. It's like, parenting is just such a massive responsibility. And I wear that heavily. Like, I want my kids to be empowered to say, you can do anything you put your mind to. And I think because I was told that, I was thinking, why not me?
Yeah. And I would add to it, you don't have to come from a background like the de Lautours to convey that kind of confidence, right? I think anyone listening to this, no matter what their situation is, can start to learn that sort of thing, especially by associating with people who are successful and reading and from people who are successful. And, self-plug here, listening to a podcast like this and hearing Mark, and you can go, you know what, it can be done. It is possible regardless of your background.
Boy, you mentioned surrounding yourself. I mean, I'm a firm believer that you are a product of your environment and those you surround yourself with. I'm super proud of my son who just got picked up to play college ball. It's kind of, everything's come full circle, Dave. I got accepted a scholarship offer for tennis to Kansas City, and now just 90 minutes away in Emporia, Kansas, my son's been offered a scholarship to go play baseball. But I'm so proud of his work ethic. He works harder than anyone that I have met. He is up at 4:30 to drive 25 minutes to go work out from 5 to 6:45 to then go to school, to then go back and hit and pitch and do all his workout routine. I mean, he's just driven in a way that I don't see young kids being driven, but he has surrounded himself with the right trainers, the right baseball athletes, the right people that are motivating him to be the best version of himself. And so I believe that those you surround yourself with are critical to your success or failure, right? I mean, you can be equally brought down by those if they are naysayers.
Yeah. And I love too that you brought up the aspect of coaching too. Like, you can surround yourself with the kinds of coaches that create those things. And that's a way that you can buy into it as well. Talk to me a little bit about where SBD is now and the kind of work that you're doing. First of all, SBD is named after who?
Yeah, I was originally going to call my company Housing Solutions, and then found that there were like 3 or 4 that had already taken that name. And so I put my wife's initials on the front of it. So Sarah Beth de Lautour is the name of the company. Yeah.
Okay. And talk to me about the kind of things that you're all doing now.
Yeah. So one of obviously we've morphed and grown and pivoted over the years, and your company takes different forms. The Courthouse Steps was our main provider of properties for a long time, and that's since gone away, just being massively competitive. We're picking up most of our volume now by helping those that are, either facing foreclosure or bankruptcy or divorce, or are able to, we're able to help them out of difficult housing situations. And so we're advertising all over the place as a brand, Best Offer KC. And we come in and give people the best offer that we can on their house and trying to alleviate the burden. And then we come in and rehab it, bring it up to a really high standard, rent it out, and then sell it to an investor that's wanting to groom and grow a portfolio. So that's one division of the company. The other, which is gaining much more momentum now, is that we're partnering with builders to build out new communities of multifamily. We've found that duplexes and fourplexes cash flow, even in today's environment, can cash flow positive, and that the rents we're charging on these higher, that we can charge higher rents on these duplexes and fourplexes so that they cash flow for the investor, and people are valuing the luxury of having a swimming pool and a pickleball court and a walking trail in their community. So they're buying into these to rent in a nicer single family community. And so we're managing those and creating homeowner associations that we can then, sell on to our investor base the assets that are in this safe community of renters.
Yeah. And what I like too about the model is that you also understand who your target market is, which is you're providing something for people who want to invest, but don't want to really think about it very much, which I fall into that category. But that shows a lot of understanding on your part as an entrepreneur of who your most valuable customer is.
Yeah, we've gone pretty deep there because, the thing that baffles me, Dave, is that more people didn't buy housing and don't buy housing. And if you ask someone, have you ever thought of I own real estate. Oh, what do you? I have my personal house and I had this one property one time, but it was such a hassle and I did away with it. The only people that you hear that had a negative experience with rental real estate are either ones that just did one or two and had one bad experience, or those that tried to DIY and do it themselves. Those that scaled, real estate wins in the end. To buy and hold, you cannot lose with real estate when you buy and hold for a long time. So yeah, we work with people that value a professional service that is fully turnkey. And so the third part of our operation, so we buy and flip, we obviously do new construction, rentals, and we're also a large property management company. So we, I think have around 700 doors under management, and that's always growing. But professional property management, really dialed in property management, is hard to do. And we do it best in class. So really proud of the property management team that we have in place.
So this leads me to my last question. You mentioned you've got 700 managed units, 700 doors is the term that you typically use. But family is really important to you. It's a huge part of your life. So my question for you is, from a structural, systemic perspective, what have you done to make sure that you're there spending time with your family and as much as possible having those dinner table conversations and supporting them?
Wow, great question. And you go through seasons. You can't delegate and, abdicate your responsibilities forever. As a solopreneur, I've gone from this journey of being just myself and have contractors that are rehabbing the houses. And then I would manage all the assets and I would do everything. I'd collect rent and I'd do everything, right? When you're growing up this business in your 20s. So then had Jackson was born, I think when I was 29 or 30. And so then in my 30s, it's kind of trying to balance, you'd have to come home and help out, but then I'd be up super late. I remember, always coming home and committing, again, with the great blueprint for success that I had from my parents. I'd always come home and have dinner with the family and help get Jackson to bed. But then it would be back to the computer, searching deals for tomorrow. What are the opportunities that are popping up, and because I'm the only guy. Then you start growing where you get your first bit of administrative help from, alleviating the administrative burden and a secretary, executive assistant, whatever you want to call it. And then you just slowly grow. But the other painful part of that, Dave, is that your company is going to morph. You start off hiring the talent you can afford. And then as you grow and continue to elevate the level of service and the commitment to your clientele, you have to level up your employees. So there is pain through cycling. I mean, the team we have right now is amazing, but it took me, 10 years to get to where we're at. So, you just slowly hire and retain the best talent you can. When you have someone leave, you try and do the best to get them back. But to your point about how do I protect my time? When I leveled up and brought on a chief operating officer to run the company, that was kind of my trigger when I had kind of hit a low point where I felt like I was, for what, right? You go through periods where, your income goes way up, but your time to with the family comes way down. And then you get to the point where you're like, okay, I could make less and just give myself back some more time and I'd be quite content. And so I think there's ebbs and flows of that. And right now I'm in a space where, Fridays are sacred. It's my time that I take off and try and spend, mornings with my bride and afternoons with, on the golf course with some of my buddies. And that leaves my Saturday, Sundays to go to the kids' activities and very present with them and, grow to get to that point where you don't miss many of their sports activities. But, as a business owner, there's a trade-off and you've got to have a supporting spouse that understands that when you're not there, it's not because you don't want to be there, but in the best interest of our family, this is a time when I need to grind.
And that's a conversation that you have to have several times over and over and find that balance. Okay, last question for you, and then we're going to wrap up with what I always do at the end, which are the action principles. 5 years from now, where do you project your career being?
We're on a pretty good trajectory right now. So my 5-year plan is continuing to scale our new construction multifamily. That's a big part of what we're doing and how we're going to continue to, help people retire and grow their wealth through real estate. So our property management company will have to be best in class. So a continued renewed focus on PM. But I could see myself, there's a play for me here within the existing staff for me to maybe take a back seat and spend a little bit more time, like I said earlier, buying back my time a little bit and allowing me to get on to some other opportunities. I'm not a guy that ever talks about, retiring myself. I mean, real estate's something that I'll always be doing. I just enjoy it. But I think continuing to step back from the day to day, knowing that my team is pretty dialed in, and I so much so that, Dave, I find myself sometimes stepping into meetings when I'll then be contributing and they're like, are you sure you want that? Because we talked about that 2 months ago and that's not really where we're heading. Oh, yeah. Okay. I mean, I find myself tripping up the team with my thoughts rather than, so I know my role, and that is to, the big ideas and big relationships. And so I think spending more time outside the office with those big ideas and big relationships, and then trusting and allowing my team to implement and process and grind behind me is kind of where we're at.
I love it. Thank you for taking the time to share your story with us. So, Mark, this is the point in these episodes where I ask the audience to participate. And by what I mean by that is I'm asking them to figure out one action that they can take this week, not something they're going to push out a month from now, but one specific thing that they're going to do based on your story, based on your example, that they can implement immediately and then make you and your story a part of their life forever. So what I'm going to do, Mark, is I'm going to suggest 3 possible actions that are based on principles that I pulled out from your story. And I'd love at the end for you to add in one more possible action. So we're not expecting them to do all of them, but to pick one of these actions. So you ready for that?
That sounds great.
Okay. So the first thing that I pulled out was that power of the dinner table conversation. And we heard that from the very beginning and how that's helped him have so much confidence and it's helped his family. And what I would encourage someone listening to this is to think, you know what, maybe you do have a family, a traditional family, and you can do that. That's wonderful. But even if you don't, you can carry on these conversations by regularly sitting down with someone that you care about, breaking bread with them, and discussing what's happening in your life, in your career. And there really is so much value in pausing and doing that and stepping aside from work and helping people and have them help you. So I would encourage someone listening to this, maybe you can make that routine, that ritual, a part of your week. Another principle was when you said there is risk in doing nothing. And I think it's really easy to fall into that trap of saying, I don't want to take a risk. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to put my neck out there and something bad's going to happen. But not doing something also has a tremendous amount of risk. So we want to make sure that we're taking calculated risks and we're being careful and cautious about it. But we also want to move and do something. So consider if there's a project that you've been thinking about or some sort of investment that you're thinking of jumping into, and ask yourself, if this is a wise investment, what's the risk of me not doing something with it? And then the last principle, it kind of ties into the first thing of those dinner conversations, but we heard so much from Mark about the confidence that he has because of the people that he associated with and because of the people who are telling him, you can do this. So my suggested action is figure out how you can surround yourself with more successful people. One of the biggest things that holds people down is they're associating with people and they're listening to the advice and opinions of people who have not accomplished what you're trying to accomplish. And when you listen to that, it's going to push you down. It has no choice but to push you down. But when you're surrounding yourself with successful people, either through the friends that you develop, the coaches that you have, or if you identify people in the workplace who you really admire, go to them and try to find out how you can listen to them more and spend more time with them. And at the very least, read and listen to the interviews of people who have been successful, the biographies that Mark brought up. All right, Mark, those are my 3 possible actions. What's one that you would add to the list?
On that last one, I just want to comment, what I'm amazed, Dave, when you talk about surrounding yourself with people is the content is out there, and no one that is successful has a scarcity mindset. I've found that when you ask a question of someone successful, they'll tell you the answer. They're not there's no guarded secrets. Everyone writes a book. Everyone tells you what they've done. Everyone will be very willing to give it. So yeah, it's a great point. Try and put yourself out there and ask others for help. I would just add also, my final principle would be give thought to your financial well-being and don't abdicate that responsibility. I think if you consider all sources of wealth accumulation, there's so many alternative investments to the stock market. But because the stock market is so heavily marketed, it's just a go-to. The first day that you step onto a job, they say, well, here's our 401k, how much, and we do a company match. Where would you like it allocated? And it has to go into the stock market. Don't be forced into something that you're not comfortable with. There is apartment complex, there's funds and syndications and individual real estate and so many alternatives to just putting money into the stock market. If people are interested in that, I would say, consider that. There's a whole nother world out there. Again, do research, become educated on it, and see if that would be something that may take your fancy.
Fantastic. I love that suggestion, Mark. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us. I know that you're going to change at least one life, if not a lot of lives, because you were generous with sharing your experience.
Well, that means a lot to me. And I love the way that you pulled out some principles from a story as well. That's a talent, and thrilled for your success, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Remember, it's not just about the knowledge that you gained, but the action that you take on that knowledge. So pick one thing and do it this week, and you'll make Mark's story a part of your life forever. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project, hosted by my dad, Dave Crenshaw, and produced by Invaluable Incorporated. Sound editing was done by my brother Stratton Crenshaw. Research and assistant production by Victoria Bedez. Voiceover by me, Darcy Crenshaw. And the music is by Ryan Brady via Pond 5 licensing. Please subscribe to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. And please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. See you next time.